go ahead and get started. Okay. We want to thank all of y'all so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And as Stacy communicated at our first gathering, we'd like to begin this time and every time by acknowledging that the land threatened by these pipelines has been stolen once before from the indigenous peoples of those areas, that it is the indigenous land that we stand on here today, and that it is indigenous peoples who started and lead the pipelines resistance movement. Each week, we ask the governor and his agencies to stop the tree felling, and today we return with this request. We demand his intervention now on both the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines. EQT is sending crews to work in snowstorms to fell trees, endangering their own work crews to expedite their destruction of Virginia and West Virginia. Meanwhile, on March 15th, Dominion asked FERC for an extension to the tree felling for the Atlantic Coast pipeline. This request was to extend cutting into May in total disregard to the migratory patterns of birds and the previously established restrictions. They believe they deserve special treatment. Tom Farrell over here. This request was followed by hard evidence that they can't follow the existing safety requirements of the ACP. And if this extension was granted, it would open the door for EQT to abuse the special allowance. On Friday, March 16th, the DEQ released their notice of violation to ACP LLC that non-mechanized tree felling activities in upland riparian areas exceeded the limit of disturbance when approaching wetlands. Not once, not twice, but 15 times. It gives ACP LLC 10 days to respond via letter. Meanwhile, the same violations may occur during that interim period. Governor Northam remains silent and motionless while the trees fall, as evidenced here. This damage to our waterways is heavy on our minds, and in celebration of yesterday's World Water Day, we also recognize the specific ways that these violations impact water in the short and long term. Fracking itself damages underground water as fracking fluids are introduced into the earth, sometimes reaching the surface, contaminating both groundwater supplies and surface water. The construction of the pipelines would introduce sediment dumps into waterways, remove tree cover that would affect the temperature of the waterways, herbicides would be introduced into the water, and the destruction of karst geology would affect entire underground networks of aquifers. If they were built, they would require hydrostatic testing, and the pipeline companies would source tens of millions of gallons of water from local and municipal sources, reducing the community's access to water for their own commercial and personal use. We do not accept these outcomes for our state or for our neighbors in West Virginia or North Carolina. So I think we're going to start it off with some chants.
First is all pipelines leak, all markets peak.
All pipelines leak, all markets peak. All pipelines leak, all markets peak. All pipelines leak, all markets peak.
One more.
All pipelines leak, all markets peak.
Yeah.
Woo! Woo! Woo!
They're cutting down our trees to sell gas overseas.
They're cutting down our trees to sell gas overseas. They're cutting down our trees to sell gas overseas. They're cutting down our trees to sell gas overseas. They're cutting down our trees to sell gas overseas.
This is a repeat back. So I will say a line and you guys copy. Okay. We, the people of Virginia.
We, the people of Virginia.
Ask the governor of Virginia.
Ask the governor of Virginia.
Dr. Ralph Northam.
Dr. Ralph Northam.
To stop the tree felling.
To stop the tree felling.
And honor his request to DEQ.
And honor his request to DEQ.
For a thorough review of construction plans.
For a thorough review of construction plans.
Yeah.
Repeat back again. Corporate greed!
Corporate greed!
We must fight!
We must fight!
Destroying water!
Destroying water!
Is not right!
Is not right!
Corporate greed!
Corporate greed!
We must fight!
We must fight!
Destroying water!
Destroying water!
Is not right!
Is not right! corporate greed.
We must fight.
We must fight.
Destroying water.
Destroying water
Is not right.
is not right.
1, 2, 3, 4. Kick pipelines out the door.
1, 2, 3, 4. Kick pipelines out the door. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kick pipelines out the door. 1, 2, 7, 8.
Renewable power in every state.
5, 6, 7, 8. Renewable power in every state.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Renewable power in every state.
Try it all together.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
1, 2, 3, 4. Kick pipelines out the door. 5, 6, 7, 8. Renewable power in every state. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kick pipelines out the door. 5, 6, 7, 8. Renewable power in every state.
Want any more? I got a million.
Yeah.
We
Want to do
good?
one more?
One more?
Cool, look at that.
Okay, remember the roof is on fire. This
Yeah.
is the planet is on fire. We don't need no frack gas, let the corporations burn. What do you think? Too much? Too much?
We'll get it as we go along.
That's good.
You like that one?
Why don't you do it first and then we'll
Okay.
talk.
The planet's on fire. We don't need no frack gas, let the corporations burn.
The planet's on fire. We don't need no frack gas, let the corporations burn. The planet's on fire. We don't need no frack gas, let the corporations burn.
Great job, Lee.
We're going to deliver a letter to Governor Northam, and I'll read it for us. Governor Northam, we are contacting you again to remind you that there is only one answer that will save Virginians from the well-documented harms of the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley pipelines. Stop them from ever being built. While the two bills you recently signed into law, SB 698 and SB 699, give the Department of Environmental Quality stop work order powers, they conveniently limit these powers to land-disturbing activities, which the DEQ has defined in such a limited scope that they do not even include the hand felling of trees. These bills also make it possible for a pipeline company to resume construction as soon as the company submits written corrective measures and the DEQ approves them. Thousands of documents and a wealth of hours of expert testimony have proven that the plans submitted to date for these pipelines are inadequate, yet the DEQ approved them anyway. The most recent were approved without public input. Under these bills, the DEQ could easily issue a stop work order for positive press coverage, then continue to approve inadequate plans regarding the pipeline, and they could continue to do so without public input. These two bills alone are not an adequate response to the grave threats of these pipelines. When interviewed about the bills, you praise their ability to empower the Commonwealth to halt construction on the pipelines if there's a serious threat to water quality. The pipelines themselves are a serious threat to water quality. On top of that, they will not serve any public need or interest. You also said, from the Blue Ridge Mountains to the Chesapeake Bay and all the rivers and streams in between, our water quality is of paramount importance to our health and our economy, and I will protect it as long as I am governor. If you stand by your own words, you must prevent any construction of these pipelines.
Yes.
Further, Dominion's ACP LLC has already been cited for 15 violations of state water control law while tree felling. Despite this, they've asked to extend their tree felling past the deadlines put in place as critical protections for wildlife, some of which are endangered species. This demonstrates the pipeline company's lack of regard for our water, wildlife, environment. You must not allow any future tree felling. Governor Northam, please keep your promises to protect Virginians, their property rights, their water, and their environment. We again ask you to do the following. Immediately halt the felling of trees along the paths of the MVP and ACP, and do not allow, under any circumstances, felling past the deadlines. Reinstate the State Water Control Board's ability to have input on the certification process and the public's input over the erosion, sediment, and stormwater plans impacts on the water certification process should be included, as supported by public statements from the SWCB at the December hearings. Rescind the memorandums of agreement where Governor McAuliffe signed our state away to EQT and Dominion for $58 million for the ACP and $27.5 million for the MVP. These agreements were made without public notice and do not provide any funding for the localities along the pipeline paths. Direct the DEQ to perform site-specific permitting as referenced in the enclosed letter you sent the agency on February 14, 2017. And we're going to enclose that letter that he clearly asked for site-specific permitting and that he's not backing up now. Match your opposition to offshore drilling to another example of ruinous fossil fuels projects, the fracked natural gas Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines. And sever your relationship with the ACP applicant, Dominion Energy. Again, the only right answer is to prevent construction of these pipelines. We implore you to do so.
Yes.
So we're also going to deliver a letter to the Attorney General, who has the power to intervene with this process too. And the letter we're sending him today says, "We return today to ask you, as our Attorney General, to stand up for the rights of Virginia landowners, for our Commonwealth's environmental health, and for the existing legal review process that should have been followed for the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines. The hand felling of trees is an erosive land disturbing action that must be halted until full certification has been received. We ask for your immediate intervention, as only weeks into the tree felling process, ACP LLC has been cited for 15 violations." We're going to include the letter from DEQ in case Attorney General hasn't seen it. He'll have a copy he can keep. As the ACP and MVP would introduce over 1,000 miles of sediment dumps and herbicides into waterways, miles of mountaintop removal, abuse of eminent domain, loss of tourism revenue, and pollution-emitting compressor stations into our Commonwealth, we ask you, Attorney General, using your legal authority to challenge FERC's authorization for tree felling in the court system. 2, declare that the DEQ did not prove reasonable assurance that waterways would not be impacted. 3, instruct the DEQ to reinstate the State Water Control Board's ability to have input on the certification process. You legally represent both agencies and can intervene so they comply. And we also ask you to challenge the legality of the memorandums of understanding that Governor McAuliffe signed with ACP and EQT that release them from any liability above the amounts listed. They were made without public notice, and they do not provide any funding for the localities along the paths. Attorney General Herring, please act in the best interest of our health and safety now. And so at this time, we want to turn it over to open it up for any words you might like to share.
Like to document for us that the court processes do work in times, and in North Carolina regarding the Atlantic Coast Pipeline recently on Wednesday, a U.S. District Judge Terrence Boyle said that the interstate pipeline developer must first pay 2 landowners before its chainsaw crews can enter their properties. In last week's private property dispute, Boyle rejected the Atlantic Coast Pipeline's arguments that its schedules and corporate priorities are in the public interest and should take precedence over the concerns of local landowners. In his decision on Friday, the judge was unmoved by the pipeline developer's urgent plea that they must begin cutting trees soon or risk blowing the deadline and being forced to delay construction on the $6 billion project until next winter. Boyle ruled that Enfield Township Fire Chief Ronnie Locke and Marvin Winstead, a 67-year-old Nash County farmer, presented a compelling case that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline's landmen were uncommunicative or deceptive in their dealings, and the facts will need to be sorted out at trial. You can call me a tree hugger if you want, Winstead said in an interview. I can accept the pipeline or I can engage in civil disobedience.
Hey everyone, I'm pretty sure I know everyone here. My name's Jam. I work with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I want to thank the Virginia Pipeline Resistors for their continued work that they've been doing week after week to put pressure on the governor, the DEQ, and the Attorney General to do everything in their authority to stop these pipelines.
Hello, Andrew at First Nations Voices. And again, I want to give another shout out. Once again, I don't think we can ever stop doing this. To give praise and thanks to 2 very heroic people who are risking their lives in inclement weather and very high up off the ground to defend the sacred. That's very important for us as First Nations people, the land is sacred to us. Already they're coming across artifacts from our people, the original people of this land, where these pipelines are going to be disturbed. And we'd like to see these artifacts recovered and returned to the rightful people of the land. So I'd like to have the governor and the attorney general and everybody else put these things on hold and let us recover the land that belongs to the original people. And again, special thanks to those two heroic people that are up in the trees. Thank you.
Do you want me to talk first?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So, before we sing our closing song, just want to thank everyone again. Thank all y'all for coming out. And to conclude today, we'll again address the governor. Let these violations be a wake-up call for him. We can no longer speak in the future tense using terms like threat, because the threats have now turned into real physical harm. The earth has already been violated, trees have already been lost, property of landowners has already been taken, habitat has already been destroyed, and water quality has already been impacted. All these injustices continue as we speak. On top of this, and in the face of the violations, Dominion had the audacity to request to disregard the felling deadline. This audacity is directly born of the inaction of our so-called leaders, like former Governor McAuliffe and Governor Northam here. Even though we're still in the pre-construction phase of this pipeline, Governor Northam has already broken his physician's oath to do no harm. And now we're being forced towards the construction phase of these projects at a dangerous speed. If Northam has any hope of restoring his promise, he will act now and stop these pipelines. And also, if y'all didn't get a chance to, we're going to send cards to the tree sitters on Peters Mountain. So if y'all didn't get a chance to, you're welcome to sign those too before y'all leave. So. Awesome. We are grateful to them. Okay.
So we were going to close with We Shall Not Be Moved. I had the copies from last time. We're just going to do the top song.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. For clean air and water, we shall not be moved. For clean air and water, we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. For plant and bat survival, we shall not be moved. For plant and bat survival, we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today, and are in solidarity with the tree sitters and all of the other communities fighting these projects. We appreciate you, and thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.